Hi, everyone. Hope you're well. Victor Counted, and this is Flourishing with Victor Counted. Excited today to introduce our guest, especially as we talk about an important topic that is very much central to our hearts. And I'm really honored to have Dr. Kellyanne Allen. A little bit about her. She's an associate professor and also an educational and developmental psychologist at Monash University. She has a lot of accomplishments. She's also the principal fellow of the University of Melbourne. I think particularly the Wellbeing Science Center for Wellbeing Science, and also she's a fellow of the Australian Psychological Society. Not just that, she's also the editor-in-chief of the Educational and Developmental Psychologist Journal. I think it's published by Taylor and Francis. And she's also the founding editor-in-chief of the Journal of Belonging and Human Connection. Now, it's definitely, you could tell that she is the right person to talk about, to have the discussion with, and discuss about belonging. But before she even got into academia, I understand that she previously was a school psychologist, and that's where she started to combine her both academic research interests in belonging and in a way that translates that into educational context to help students and even academics themselves to find a better way to, I guess, work out their sense of belonging. And you could also tell that in a world where loneliness and social isolation is on the rise, we do need a psychology of belonging, or rather to look at belonging science, and you will get a sense of what that is, But without further ado, I do want to introduce Kelly, and maybe I wanted to ask, based on the work that you've done, what's your understanding of belonging, and how have you at least defined it in your work? But feel free to introduce yourself as well to our guest if you feel like it. But let's just start from there. What is the thing about belonging that most people have not heard about? The simplest way that we can define that.
Yes, defining belonging. Now I don't think there is a simple way to do it at all, but Victor, thank you so much for the introduction. I really appreciate it. And I really have nothing more to add. I don't think you could have been more comprehensive. But belonging, it's an area I feel deeply passionate about, and my work in schools as a school psychologist has certainly informed that passion. And I guess the best way to describe belonging, and I really lean on the people that have come before me that have done extensive work in that belonging space, like Roy Baumeister and Mark Leary, that, that sense of belonging is about feeling accepted and valued. And I think that's what it means for most people. Now, I need to preface this, so sorry to keep going, but there's a lot of researchers and a lot of academic work, and there's a lot of practitioners and people that will associate belonging primarily with relationships and other people. And I think that's really important, because about being valued and being accepted, it's about other people. And you need the other people to validate you and not reject you and include you and all those kind of things. So people are important to feeling a sense of belonging. But as we sort of learn more about some of the knowledges and history, some of the things that we've kind of, I guess, neglected through the years and through our research and the voices we've prioritized and ignored, we're learning that, Indigenous cultures can really shed a different perspective on belonging and have so much knowledge to share around that. And then, of course, from that, we learn the importance of belonging to land and community and to kinship and place and space. So my definition of belonging tries to be inclusive of the different perspectives. I see myself as somebody that tries to pick up different disciplines, different scholarly work. So
Nice.
Accepted, but much broader.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for that. But let me go back to your personal story about how you started with belonging research. What inspired you? How did it start? Was there something that you saw that you took note of when you were a school psychologist that led to that transition for you?
Yes, it was this intersection of perhaps four main things. I was learning about some really great research that was happening in the space by Meredith O'Connor, who was looking at, these developmental outcomes across the lifespan being so deeply informed by a sense of school belonging. I was listening to Alex Haslam, also in a podcast, talking about the benefits of feeling a sense of belonging to the group for things like memory and other sort of long-term outcomes. But it was these two experiences I had, like living just like within my community. Yeah. And one was, I was doing this walk. I was training to do this walk called the Kokoda, which of course is very special for many Australians. And it's very, very high mountains and lots of dips, and it's quite a challenging walk. So I was doing a lot of nighttime training, and during that training, I come into contact with this lady that was actually living in her car, and I sensed that she was living in the car. Actually, I didn't know she was living in the car. I just had that that feeling because I would see the glow of a device on in her car at nighttime when I was training, and I the courage to knock on her window one night, and it did take a lot of courage. I was terrified, but at the same time, I had also terrified her. So we just had these first few moments together with screaming. I'd startled her, and then she had startled me. But after we got past that, I learned, I had this opportunity to meet the most amazing woman. She was so incredibly articulate and clever and inspiring, and just debunked all the myths of that I might have been holding at the time of somebody that might choose to live in a car, because she was empowered living in her car. And the story was that she had fled domestic violence and was feeling safe and comfortable living in her car, but she chose to live not sort of near where she grew up necessarily, and not near where she had fled from, but actually the school she went to in secondary school. She felt that her school was the most safest place that she could go and park her car. And the way she spoke about that school and the teachers and her relationships she had with her peers, I remember listening to her talk, and I remember thinking at the time, this is really interesting. That, imagine having somebody that had left school 20 years earlier talking about that place in the way that it was. And I thought, what are the ingredients that make someone feel like they belong to school, so that we could capture these ingredients so that all schools could then have these same strategies. So that was one event. But also related was I ran into a parent of somebody, they had sent their kid to the same school, but also 20 years earlier. So a really long time ago. But the way they talked about the school with their hand on their heart, and their eyes were tearing up, and they said, oh, yes, we just love that school. And it's not just students that feel that sense of belonging, it's parents, it's the community. And that's what inspired me.
Wow, that's amazing. It's interesting how you say something that even though that these people had finished from the school itself 20 years ago, they still had that strong connection and to that place. That's amazing. And
Victor, the research is showing that too. I've just had this opportunity to engage in these two studies that have looked at long-term outcomes of feeling a sense of belonging at the age of 15. One led by Phil Parker, who found, the relationships with employment and further education. And then another one that's tapped in with the team at the Australian Temperament Project that's showing these long-term benefits for mental health outcomes like stress, depression, anxiety, all these years later. So I'm finding it quite fascinating.
Yeah, that's amazing. It makes me wonder, and as you look at that, maybe for, let's say, school management or school psychologists that is thinking about how to integrate the framework for belonging in their school, what are the first things, what are the things that they need to do to turn that around so that the school become more inviting for that kind of experience that you're talking about? What do you think that they could do to kind of start to change systems or the connections that people have to that place?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the very first thing that I think schools or leaders or policymakers or anybody, parents, any of this, what we call stakeholders need to think about or acknowledge, I think, is that belonging is very individual to different people. It's, what is influencing that sense of belonging is going to vary from student to student or child to child. Yeah. And I think that needs to be the first thing we need to think of. And I think the more I research belonging, the more I come to appreciate just how important those individual perspectives are. When we do research on big data, we sometimes, we tell a story, and the story is, about the bulk of people, the majority of people. It's really omitting the outliers. But those outliers, or we call them outliers in research, they're people. They're people that are not being influenced by the variables or strategies in the research. So I guess my point is that recognizing that feeling a sense of belonging and the things that influence an individual, we need to be asking the students and the children that we're working with, we need to be getting to know them. What helps them feel connected? What do they need? What do their social networks look like? What are the social dynamics? What are their social dynamics with the peers around them? What's their relationship like with their teachers? Do their teachers know them? Are their parents interested in school, or are they like going a little bit hard in celebrating when it's school holidays and days off and weekends, or are they taking holidays during school term? Like, I think it boils at that real practical level. It's important. The research is important. The research tells us belonging is important. It tells us what's right. That can guide us, but I think in terms of translating that and being practical, we need to hear the stories of the people involved.
Yeah, and mostly those that are the margins, isn't it? But then identifying them becomes, I guess that's where the challenge might be for some school systems, to finding those that are the margins, and especially students that are the margins, that are outliers.
Yeah. How do we connect with them? When I was in,
especially if they're already feeling a sense of disconnection with the system already.
Yeah.
How can we practically, as educators, engage those people, those students? I don't know. Like, I'm just thinking about how feasible that could be, especially in a time when most students come to whether it's our schools or program, and they're not thinking about learning. Some are coming to learn, but at the same time, they're thinking about just finishing and going on with their life, right? Rather than living in the moment, having the necessary learning and social experiences that they should have in that setup. But is there also a responsibility on the side of the student or students or people to also help themselves in actually be motivated? Or, is there like a responsibility on their part when we talk about belonging, or is it something that must be driven by the management and the school system to make that happen? Because at the end of the day, I do believe that for most people or most students, if they're not self-driven or intrinsically motivated, I don't know if there's much you could do for such a person. But what kind of do you think the responsibility should also be on the students?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But students need to, one, recognize how important belonging and social relationships and social networks are. They need to know that. So I do think there's that psychoeducational element, that educational element where we're teaching this so that students and children can recognize the importance of belonging. But there are absolutely things they can learn about. But there's things that they need to do to help them feel a sense of belonging. And I think empowering them with those opportunities that, if they're sitting on their device in their bedroom and not leaving it and not engaging in those social relationships. Now, whether those social relationships, for some students, that they might be started virtually. And I know there is like a whole swag of different voices out there that are saying technology is bad for social relationships. The work that I've done has seen not the opposite necessarily, but it recognises the importance of some of those virtual spaces for building those early relationships. And they might, for some students that it might be shy or anxious or unable to engage with people in real life, they can actually help sort of start building those relationships online that can then transpire. Online to help transpire offline as well. But students, so they need to recognize that sitting in their room isn't necessarily going to build those relationships. So joining groups and showing up and looking.
And those groups do they have to be online or?
No. Like in real life, recognizing the importance of hobbies and, recreational activities, sport. These are all really important things that you can't just be a passive bystander. You need to be active and join in.
Yeah. That's a good point, because definitely I think it makes sense that technology has changed the way that we connect with each other. And, of course, the way young people also connect with one another, beyond just the classroom.
Yes.
But why is it that in spite of those provisions, the technological provision that they have, and different mediums to connect, and why is it that still, I think, even currently, that there's really an epidemic of loneliness among young people? Why do you think that might be happening?
That's probably the $1 million question. Like, why are people feeling more lonely? You almost need an anthropological, interviewee to be able to respond to that, I think, or somebody that has done research over time to look at the way there's been shifting dynamics in our society. There's been, we've seen lots of changes around the way communities operate and the way we come together. I think Putnam talks about, the church being so central to societies once upon a time for many people, and how that used to be a source of gathering and community. And if someone was sick, people would make food and help and support, and just how that's changed. Schools in many ways are a hub, a community hub in a similar way, but that's not something that speaks to everybody. If you're not a parent and you're not a student, then the school might not be that place of, coming together and socializing. As a parent that's dropping their children off at school, you get to relate and chat with other parents. It's an obligation that you have to do, take your children to school, but
the reason why I asked the question also. Yeah. The reason why I asked the question was also, I think in your book you talked about or made a statement that belonging begins at birth. And so, I was just thinking, is there some things that have to do with why we are lonely today, most people, that has to do with an experience that we had at birth, and how that kind of filters out and also is translated to how we make connections today.
Oh, absolutely.
And do you think there's some dynamics there? Because for the fact that you made that statement meant that you do either believe that, also maybe some of your work have shown that indeed that belonging begins at birth. But could you explain how that is the case?
I guess the patterns of belonging that we have, the way we relate with each other, the way we build trusting relationships, the way we feel a sense of attachment, those patterns, particularly if they're being developed in the early years, can really inform our social relationships later in life. And, for adults that are perhaps feeling lonely or ostracized or rejected, in some ways it does help to be able to go back and maybe work through where those patterns may have emerged. Was it a traumatic experience? Was it attachment issues with parents? Was it rejection, early in the early years, bullying, or going to, early childhood spaces that didn't feel safe? Like, they can really inform. And in some ways, you almost need to be an adult that's able to reflect on that as an adult and pick up those feelings, because a lot of us are sort of carrying these patterns and these ways of behaving and the ways of engaging with others that based on beliefs that were formed when we were children. As adults, going back and pulling them out and examining those again and looking at how rational they are, how helpful they are, how real they are, can be a really helpful way, I think, for many adults that are feeling lonely. So I guess that's what I mean by the patterns of belonging that we can form around our relationships.
Yeah, which I guess that those are kind of patterns like the attachment styles that you mentioned would kind of predispose the individual to how, whether or not they want to form a sense of belonging or build relationships. Yeah. Like I could imagine a child that grew up, developing, let's say, an anxious attachment pattern. Just trying to imagine how that translates to their ability to belong. They might belong to a particular group, but then when they are not getting what they wanted, they'll feel that they are the center of attention. That can become catastrophic for the child who might want to bring in their clinginess in that setup, right? Compared to one that, let's say, has an avoidance attachment, who might likely shut down or withdraw completely and may not have the capacity to build or make themselves vulnerable to actually build relationship that would help them belong in. For those kind of people, most of them who are adults as well, and I say this because myself, I know that I grew up, due to my experience, I developed an attachment avoidant pattern. And so it's easy for me to kind of withdraw back and maybe go back to my cave, if you will. How can people like me that might have an insecure attachment pattern, how can they intentionally, deliberately kind of build systems, or whether you call it belonging references that can help them to thrive and stretch themselves to forge relationships that will help them find a sense of belonging?
It takes work and it takes effort, and it's not always about the system, I think. I mean, if from a psychological perspective, a lot of our work is around cognitions and perceptions. There's a lot of work by people like Greg Walton, who, has, and this picture, but, who has, the social belonging interventions, which are aimed at changing those attributions. So I guess that it's an intervention. So that is an example of how the system can support changing those interventions. But as an adult, we have like REBT and CBT, and we have ways of, changing those attributions around whether or not we feel a sense of belonging. It's very easy to say we don't fit in, or those people don't like me. And it's really, our brain is biased to think of the negative and look at the ways we don't belong. But putting that effort into actually looking at, what are the ways I do belong? And what are the ways that I can feel a greater sense of belonging? And am I actually doing those things? Like, am I cancelling commitments that I make with friends? Am I actually going through and engaging with those, invitations that I might be getting? Or am I just wanting to, go to bed at 7 p.m. and not...
Or maybe watch Netflix, isn't it? Binge the whole weekend instead of getting out to kind of make connections. And particularly for, someone that might not have like a partner, right? I think that's very important. Maybe could you speak more into that, especially for most people that are looking for a sense of belonging?
Yeah.
Maybe they don't have a significant other in their life. What are the practical ways that they can find this?
Yeah, absolutely. And that they might be isolated. You were musing about what's changed in society, and I don't have the answer to that because I think there's lots of things that we could say has changed. Yeah. And it is easy to blame technology. But I mean, one thing, we're working so much harder and so much more than we have in the past. And, back to your comment about Netflix on a Friday night at 7 p.m., we kind of may be craving that downtime a little bit more than previously. And, catching up with people for some people is work. Like it takes effort, and maybe that is one of the changes that has taken place. But if you want to,
why is that the case? Why does it take a lot of work to maintain relationship? Because essentially, if we can build a sense of belonging with a group of people, it involves sustaining lasting human connections, and that in itself is work.
Yeah.
Why is it the case? Because I think generation after us, I don't think they had this problem, even at the time when they didn't have technology to stay connected. But now it's so difficult to stay connected with people, especially when you are not within the same proximal range. Like Why is that?
And you're constantly trying to negotiate availability and time and finding a time that is, because our lives are so busy, aren't they? So yeah, I don't have the solution to that. I think we're busier. Maybe we don't have the same resources, the personal resources to invest that time. And maybe a lot of us are electing. It's like elective not belonging because of the time, and perhaps we're not feeling like we've got the energy to connect with others. But
and it's interesting because those people. Sorry. Now, I want to say it's interesting because those same people are the ones that will complain that they don't have social connections.
And I would ask, what are they doing to maintain the connections that they have or build new ones, and have a look at some of those, what might be going on for them.
Yeah. I used to say this to some of my close friends that I said, oftentimes when you find people or someone complaining about things, if you look closer at them, you find that they're actually the cause of the problem themselves. And oftentimes, maybe I'm wrong by saying this, that when you find someone complaining about not having friends, being lonely and all that, sometimes to some extent, I'm not saying it is all the time, but it's just their lack of ability or inability to kind of sustain the connections that they already have.
Yeah.
Is that the case, or maybe there are nuances that I might not have captured, or maybe I'm seeing this differently?
I think there's, through this conversation, we've talked about opportunities that might be available through the system, and we've talked about the internal intrinsic motivation that they might have to belong. Some people just don't have the same social need or the same need to belong as others. And we've also talked about perceptions, but I think the part of it that might be missing of what we've talked about so far is the competencies that people have to belong. So sometimes it might be the case, and this also acknowledges the importance of people in that belonging, or maybe even cultural awareness or cultural connection, but those competencies to be able to interact. Do they have the social and emotional skills to be able to engage with others? Do they have the conversational skills? Do they feel awkward around new social relationships? Are they able to break down those barriers, and do they have the skills to be able to connect? But at the same time, do they have the skills to be able to cope with things like stress, adversity, things that crop up? Because I see that as another source of people questioning their belonging. When crappy things might happen, then people might think, I don't belong here. I don't. The finance sends you an email saying you filled out the finance form all wrong. And you might question, do I actually belong in this workplace?
Well, nobody likes the finance department of their workplace, I'll tell you.
Oh, no, just I love the finance department.
Well, my people, they are the best anyway. I'm just saying, like, the finance department, right?
Our finance, sometimes I think the finance department speak finance talk, and I don't understand it. But, that is also important for belonging in some respects, because different disciplines, different professions, we've all got a different way of communicating, don't we? And, with the belonging lens, we need to be able to break down those barriers, but yeah, the finance team is another conversation.
Yeah.
I love you, finance team.
We're just, I think it's just an example. It's not as simple as saying that, our finance department are bad or contributing to people not feeling a sense of belonging. Of course, that's not what we're saying.
No.
But of course, there are systems, I guess, hierarchical systems that might make people feel that way, especially when they are junior level employees. They might feel that way, especially when they don't have that communication or conversation with those teams. And I think which is something that is very key. Communication is very important. One of the things that I love about, I'm not saying it because I'm trying to talk about my workplace, but one of the things I love about my university is the transparency of some of the leaders that we can have to talk about things, and which I think it's incredibly important, especially for a new faculty, that might come into a team and might not have the charisma to engage conversations with colleagues that are above them. And I think that transparency and open communication is very important, But still, we would agree that there are people that may not have the skill set and competencies to forge social connections on their own. But also, I do think that these are things that can be learned, right? Even when you don't have that. And sometimes, you force yourself to do those things, not because you have that. Like for me personally, I know that I prefer to just be on my own, right? That's my natural introverted kind of thing. But as I was thrust into lots of leadership position, like when I was doing my undergraduate program, I became the student president. So I can't be the shy victor. So I've got to get out and, be kind of social and, presidential, if you will, to within the student body then. But I know some of those things would have to take some kind of self-initiative. It has to be self-directed. It can also be learned. But do you think that personality might also have something to do with that? Because we would expect that someone, at least with the big five, that someone that it's openness, someone that's a bit more open to experience, it's much likely to want to throw themselves into a social circle that they're not familiar with, right? Also, in terms of personality, even though we're talking about the big five, even the dark triad, psychopathy, narcissism, is it possible that, let's say, a narcissist might trust themselves into a social circle to take advantage of that? How can we distinguish between the two? Those that are coming into a relationship or a social circle because they genuinely maybe fit within their personality, they're open, but also they, want to try that out. But how can we distinguish that from those that are coming in that might be psychopaths or might be narcissists that want to take advantage of that circular field? And how is it possible to distinguish this anyway?
Yeah, it is possible. And some people are doing some research on personality psychology and belonging at the moment, and it's really interesting. And I think fundamentally it affects our need to belong as well, and how that, whether or not we have that strong need and, what fulfills that need. And it comes back to the individual differences. But I think, I talk about getting to know people, like really know people as humans. And I think that helps navigate what might help bring them in and feel a sense of belonging and help them to connect when you're sort of appreciating people as individuals and seeing their strengths and being able to harness that. But it's also about knowing yourself. And I don't think that we're necessarily always good at that. Do we know our strengths? Are we applying our strengths? Do we know us? Do we know our personality? I did. Can I just say, I just did a course on LinkedIn, and as a part of that,
I saw that.
did you see that?
You posted about it. Yeah.
Yes, I did. But as a part of that course, the instructor talked about how she developed a PowerPoint presentation just about herself and what she represented and what she stood for. And doing the course, and I like to do the right thing, I also made a PowerPoint presentation about myself.
I'm a good student.
It made me really reflect on who I am and what I stood for and what I wanted to be. And I don't think we're necessarily always putting that time in to really understand ourselves and our personality, because, we're putting work in, I feel too anxious, or I'm staying up all night thinking about conversations, or we're kind of being very critical of ourselves rather than just lean into this is who we are and this is our temperament and this is, these things like, perhaps feeling worried and anxious sometimes also have a strength side or a strengths component to that side. And, how are we using, we're not all the same, we think differently and we have different perceptions. My boss says, horses for courses.
Yeah.
And, the staff have different horses for courses, but, and personality makes such a big difference. I think in terms of leadership, you can go off and you can learn all those leadership skills, but some people just have that personality. They didn't need to do a course. They know how to empathize, they know how to normalize, and they know how to connect.
But also it's important to detect, because a psychopath can do that effectively. Go on without you knowing that the intentions is very different, and it's just a way of planting themselves within a circle to take advantage of that relationship. And you have people that do that a lot. In fact, they associate with you because there's something that they would get out of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for those kind of people, do they not have the right to feel a sense of belonging, even though their intentions are very much dubious and schemy?
I guess it comes down to what is actually happening in those relationships, and is it causing harm? Because
Maybe a long term.
maybe they have a right to belong. I mean, there's lots of examples of harmful groups in society that might actually, that might be a sense of belonging for the people that join those groups, but criminal groups or gangs or conspiracy theory groups. These are groups that the members of them may genuinely feel a sense of belonging for those groups, and so there's a benefit of that. But then what outweighs is the negativity of what that group might be giving back to society, which might not necessarily be something that we desire or want.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. The other question, let's kind of move towards kind of the end of this conversation. And I wanted to ask, I usually ask this question to my guests. And for those that are actually watching and wondering why we're talking about personality and belonging, our last podcast was with Dr. Peter Jonathan, who it's one of the pioneers of the dark triad personality. And he argues that the dark triad is very important for our flourishing. So that's why I kind of bring that back, because that conversation was very what's an important one on many levels. And so if you're watching and you want to kind of get a sense of what that is, feel free to watch that video and as we keep track with it. But let's come back again to maybe I ask this question as we begin to wrap up. Can a sense of belonging increase human flourishing? And by human flourishing, it could be many things. It could be people's sense of well-being. It could be people's... I try to look at human flourishing as a multi-dimensional construct that has to do with the meaning-making process of people, their life satisfaction and happiness, with their mental and physical health, a sense of character that comes with people who may be flourishing, and even the social relationship component, which is very central to well-being. So can we argue, we do agree, or I believe you believe that a sense of belonging can increase human flourishing?
Yeah. And look, I don't think we need to argue. I think we've got the empirical evidence to show that sense of belonging is deeply related to flourishing, well-being outcomes, life satisfaction outcomes, meaning and purpose. These are all important things. And whatever discipline, and I think one thing we need to do is make sure we're really encouraging all disciplines to, have their view on this and their take on this as well. But whatever perspective or lens you're looking at, we know that belonging is a really important concept within the flourishing.
And thank you for saying that. Now, but then can human flourishing really occur in the absence of belonging, in the absence of someone having a strong sense of belonging?
Do
you think that can happen, that people can flourish in the absence of that?
Yeah, because I think people have different belonging needs. And so I think you could have a sense of flourishing without necessarily belonging. And I think what might play into that is what their needs are around belonging. However, I think if you have a high need to feel a sense of belonging, then your ability to flourish might be impacted.
You think that belonging need might have something to do with I think in cross-cultural psychology, we usually use the individualistic versus collectivist framework.
Yes.
You think it might have more to do with that someone from an individualistic context or culture or background, it's likely to flourish without having that sense of belonging? You think that's the case?
I think there's cultural differences, but I really think it boils down to the individual differences. I think practitioners and researchers need to have the broad research lens, but then we need to bring it back to those individuals.
Thank you. I'm happy that you talked about belonging as something that is very critical and important for human flourishing. Now, let's bring this back to academics and speak a bit more on belonging for academics, and really to what would that look like for academics who might be seeking a sense of belonging, or maybe are thinking about how they can merge their work so that with their life's purpose so that they can have a sense of meaning in what they're doing. And what would that look like for them, especially in a field or in a sector that is often very much self-directed? Research, of course, now, science is moving towards collaboration and all that, but at the end of the day, for early career researchers, usually the thinking pattern starts with them trying to reach an element of that is still very much self-motivated. Now, what can you tell academics that are trying to figure out how to plug themselves in networks and social groups that can help them flourish in their field? Now, what would that look like? How can, whether it's they make their research purposeful so that it can facilitate that sense of belonging? Because I noticed that researchers that are part of a larger group of people or collaborators or networks actually are the ones that are doing well, compared to ones that are just doing everything by themselves.
Yeah.
They're writing papers by themselves, just themselves. You could tell the difference. It's only a matter of time the person burns out, right? Because they're not collaborating. And how can we bring that idea of, I guess you mentioned earlier in our conversation, humanizing academia so that it can facilitate flourishing and belonging frameworks across board?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't know where to start with that. It's such a big thing. I think humanizing academia. I think the history of academia has, there's those old notions around siloed and ivory towers, and I think as we enter a space where we're able to collaborate more easily across the Zoom and across not necessarily Zoom, but like video conferencing and the different email, to be able to reach and somebody on the other side of the world through email or through social media is right at our fingertips. It's such an advantage for us to break down some of those barriers. So I think, being able to collaborate more, not just with other academics, but, maybe with the people that are the focus of our research. So if it's students, to work with students and bring them into that research process. Maybe they become advisors or with industry, and how we might work with industry. And when I say industry, I kind of, I've always felt uncomfortable about the term industry because I think even that creates this us and them perspective as well. And there's lots of stakeholders that we call industry that I don't think they would consider themselves industry, like schools, for instance. So how can we sort of break down some of those traditional barriers, be more human, so early career academics can see themselves in the people that have come after them? And, I really think, moving towards impact rather than, social impact, particularly if our research relates to social impact, rather than focusing on academic impact measures.
And do you think that kind of social impact would change academia, or to what extent would that, maybe not so much on the scientific side, but at least the level of loneliness among academics, which I think it's significant, especially for early career researchers that are looking for new role and kind of insecure, unstable positions. And most of them, I would argue that, especially as you finish your PhD, the first 2 years can be very brutal. And if you don't have a support system, it can be very lonely. I'm saying that also from experience as well. For people like that, what is your advice to them?
Yeah, network. Start during your PhD, start building your networks. Really think about what comes next after your PhD as well, and be really strategic there. One of the things that I felt when I finished my PhD was just that loss of connection with my supervisor, and those weekly meetings and the absence of that just felt like
your identity is kind of tied to the person. And in my case, I guess I was kind of very self-motivated. Kind of, I know what I want to do. So it was good to have my professors and supervisors, but I didn't have that experience where I had that unique, special connection with my supervisors because they were, they did their best, but, but it's good to see that you had that experience, and it's always a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Relationship, I think.
But you need to zoom out, and you need to really think, what's the big goal? What do you want to, what is your big goal? What do you want to change? And then everything that you can do can then work towards that, but zooming out and working on that big picture, or at least knowing what that big picture is, can help you make more intentional and purposeful decisions along your journey. What you say yes and no to helps. Yeah.
And sometimes most people don't have those options, I guess to say, because it's really it's a transitory phase.
Yeah.
And at that point, relationships really matter. I think.
Yeah.
It can be tough for most people. But if you're watching and you are an early career researcher who is struggling with loneliness, hey, do know that there's hope for you. Make sure you reach out. Network if possible. It's possible even at that time you might not have funds to travel for conferences and all that. That's okay. Yeah. Reach out to people, send emails, be the first to do that. I think one of the things that's helped...
Right, Victor, they could leave a comment on this video and...
Exactly. And
we could have a connection thread happening on this.
Exactly. And one of the things I admire about Kelly is the fact that she doesn't just talk about this thing. She does model this sense of collaboration. And she's very generous with that as well. So I want to salute you for leading in that light, and also throwing your voice to the need to humanize academia. I think it's very important. But last question: are there policy changes you think that will make a difference in academia and in the public sector to kind of help to position belonging as a very important, or to help build communities where belonging is something that is centralized?
Yeah, and look, I think yes, there's a long answer to this, which we might not have time for. The short answer is yes. I think it starts off with acknowledging that belonging is important. I think we need to have an understanding with the policymakers and the governments that this is an important area that we do need to invest time and resources in. And then we need to look at how can we build opportunities. And I think that certainly needs to come from that community lens or the government lens. What opportunities are in place for people to build those connections, and aware that they're not going to be necessarily the same the same ingredients are not going to speak to other people. Through some of my research with young people following COVID, where, they didn't have the same opportunities to physically connect, one thing that they said through my research is that they felt awkward and they needed adults, even though they're teenagers, up until the age of 18, they needed adults to help them re-engage, to break the ice. So just appreciating that different people will have different needs. Some people might feel, uncomfortable. And so we need to be providing those opportunities, and on an individual level, appreciating that other people are probably also hoping and wanting to fulfill a sense of belonging and connect, but might not necessarily have the skills or the comfort level in taking that first step.
Right.
Appreciating that most people will have a need to belong. That need might vary, but
I do agree completely. And as we, this is probably the last question, more like a personal side of things, especially as we think about belonging. Now, I know that we've talked about belonging in the context of academia, research, given the fact that you're an educational psychologist, so it kind of makes sense. But I know for most people watching this video, probably they will click because for them, belonging is about culture, where they are born, and all those stuff. I want to end by asking you this question, Kelly. Because I opened your website and the first question that I saw there was kind of I'm like, whoa, I was taken back, right? It made me to kind of ponder and think about the question itself. But I want to throw it back to you, Kelly. Where do you belong?
I belong in lots of spaces. I belong to my family. I feel a sense of belonging to my workplace, but particularly the school that I'm in. I've got a wonderful boss. I've got beautiful colleagues. I feel a sense of belonging from the silent discos I go to and from my friendship groups. So, but if I didn't attend those spaces, I probably would find, my sense of belonging would be hampered in some ways.
Yeah, that's really beautiful the way you captured that, because it kind of shows that you don't belong in one place, right? There's nothing like that.
Yes.
It's the people, it's the communities, it's the things that you plug, the networks that you plug yourself that really help you to have a full picture of your sense of belonging. And thank you for that. That's been beautiful.
Thank you.
And
Lovely to talk with you, Victor.
yeah, same here. I'm really excited to have this time with you. It's been wonderful, and I want to thank you. And for those that are watching, thank you also for being a part of this conversation. Do drop a comment below if you have any questions, and if you want to reach out to Dr. Allen. Maybe for those that actually want to reach out to you, what's the best way that they can connect? Especially the early career researchers, they want collaboration. Yeah.
I'm very discoverable. I think you can contact me on any of the social media platforms that I'm on. And, of course, my email. That's fine.
And what's the email?
It's kelly-ann.allen@monash.edu.
Nice. Thank you. It's been wonderful to have the session on Flourishing with Victor Counted. I'm really honored and excited about this section. I want to say thank you to you, Kelly. It's been wonderful having this section with you, and I hope you have a wonderful day. And hey, for those joining us, I hope you have a great day. Okay.
Bye for now.